I think it goes,
Oh, maybe that-
Oh, yes, to the cloud.
Let's make sure, give me 1 second, just make sure it's set to record to the cloud and not to any computer. No, perfect.
Thank you.
John Constantine, 400 North Narberth. I do want to say that this committee is very important to the public. I think it should continue. I think it can be very helpful and instructional to maintaining a professional police force. And you know, seriously, keep them on the right track, so that citizens don't get hurt when responding to calls. I don't know if you've read any of the documents that were provided, you know, where officers are quoting themselves a bit. Have trouble responding to calls, you know, that's a serious problem. And I don't know if they refute that after the fact, but they have made statements that they have difficulties responding to calls. I know there's ADA requirements and stuff like that you have to be sensitive about, but you know, the public should come first, their safety first. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. As always, it's a great reminder of the purpose of the police forces to be serving the needs of the community. Thank you. Moving along on the agenda, police chief is not able to be here today. He has a day off scheduled. He didn't send me any updates or policies that he's working on right now. So that'll remain silent. The other update I wanted to give was on the public health and safety meeting, which is who we report to, who then reports to Borough Council. Our initial report was on their agenda. One of the things that I found really interesting is that the current chair of public health and safety didn't actually have a copy of our original mandate. So when they received the report, you know, it sort of felt like, well, okay, what's the value of this? Like, what is, you know, because we didn't have any action items in it. So once I was able to sort of get her that, the context for the report became much more, it became much more obvious. But for me, it was a good reminder that we need to frame, you know, anything that we take on, we want to make sure that we frame for them. There was a lot of, people appreciated the report. People really appreciated that we had dived into some of the data as well, and that we had gotten everything sort of in one place. There were not, I'm sort of thinking, there weren't any real questions. There was more comment about the value of the report. So that's where we are. When I forwarded it, I think you guys were all CC'd on the email. I've sort of been keeping a track of topics that have come up in our conversations and emails. And I forwarded those to Jean and asked her to also, you know, obviously, as we go forward, we need guidance about what they want us to do next and so forth. So that, I don't want to move on to the next agenda item first, but that was sort of the context of the meeting.
A question.
Please.
Did the committee remember that they had requested this from this committee?
So there are three members of public health and safety. It's Cindy, Jean, and Excellency, I guess. And so Cindy is the only one that had been on public health and safety when we were formed. So, and there was not, as you guys know, like there's all this stuff that's out there and then it gets handed over and what do people read? So no, as a body, they did not remember what our mission was. So I read into the record, you know, specifically what it was that we were addressing.
I guess in terms of action items, I feel like in what we gave them, we were sort of framing a recommendation around communication and defining for residents what it is the police department does and how to reach them and things like that. But maybe we made it too subtle. And we didn't make it like a clear action, like you must do this, or.
I agree with you that as we proceed and as they proceed with providing us with tasks, we have to look at that priority because that's specifically what we got from our citizens, right?
Right.
They're not inaccurate. It's not like we had a list of here are the 6 action items that we're going to be taking on next. So I do think that message was heard.
Okay.
Right, the 2 main points are bolded in there. One, that people seem to be generally pleased with having a police department, and the other being that, but people don't really know what to do. People being unclear on things.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
So are we finished with this project?
Yes, we're finished with that project, unless,
Do you anticipate, based on what you heard at the meeting, they might send questions back to us about
that, I think that's it. I think they're sent to the files. It was released to the public as part of the, I don't know if you've looked, but with every agenda that goes up for a borough council meeting, there's also a packet of whatever documents and data they're going to be using at that meeting, which also gets posted in advance of the meeting. So our report was part of the meeting packet, I imagine. I actually didn't sort through it, but so it also is part of the public record.
Absent any other charges not to or to, it would make sense to me to try to just each year, once a year, to look at the annual data and just do a comparison, because especially the data that we received from Chief String at the end had some really interesting pieces that we could look at in terms of, it was finally like a much more comprehensive data set. And if we just use that as the comparison point going forward, we can see if there's continued not to be any real issues for us to talk about, or if there are things that pop up from it, but.
I think that's great. I think what would make sense for that is just sort of seeing what is their annual review, or is there a time, rather than we're sort of moving into the next, where these are bleeding together, which is appropriate. But in terms of setting priorities and tasks, I want to be really mindful that we need to add value. And that in part means not creating work if it's necessary, but not creating unnecessary work. Make things better is sort of the credo. So I think that it makes sense for us to check in with the chief to see what is their, do they have a time where they review the data? Obviously, at some point it needs to get, I don't know if the UCR data is automatically pulled or they need to report it, but let's just make sure that whenever that data set happens, that we get a copy of it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because as I was looking at it, there was interesting data about traffic stops and it did not exactly match up with the racial breakdown of Narberth. I don't know that it was so far off, and that could be a whole host of reasons, but it's just the type of thing that I would think would make sense that we monitor, even if there's nothing to do about it right now.
What was, do you remember what he called that data? Because I agree that last set was what was most interesting. Do you remember what he called it?
It was something traffic. Traffic with race and gender. And the other important thing was they separate the other data pool that they gave us. Traffic was separated out, whereas the first round of data, it was included with it. So it was not easy to do a direct comparison because the reporting was clearly different.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll talk to the chief about, when do they have a time in their annual cycle where they review data or report data so that we can at that point make it sort of a standing part of our cycle.
I think I know the answer, but I'm going to pose it anyway, this question. Does anybody think there are any people or groups that we talk to for this project that might be waiting for some follow-up from us? As in, did anything change after they expressed their concerns?
So I wasn't at any of the individual meetings. I did not get that feeling from.
I didn't either, that's why I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah.
I had some feedback.
I don't mean feedback from necessarily our committee, but.
Right, did anyone say to you, hey, we really like X, and
Right.
therefore we should report back to
Right.
Pride, that,
Well-
they've made X changes, and.
Or a different way is, if you said public health, like we shared the data with public health shared it with the community. I guarantee you that the community by and large does not look at the public health agenda and documents and say, here's the data that was sent. Do we have to share that with anyone?
I don't mean, so the answer is they will go to public health. So if anybody had that much of a concern, they wouldn't come to our committee.
To answer your question about, was there anything that we gleaned from any of these reports that we now have some sort of moral obligation to go back and report back to? My answer to that is I didn't see anything. I don't remember anything coming up specifically. Before we move on to what do we need to provide to the public, like to any of these three groups that we met with, Pride, Nervous, or to any of the respondents to the civic questionnaire or the questionnaire, is there anything specific that we need to go back with? My answer to that question is I don't think so.
Did we thank anyone?
Did we thank them? We did not thank them.
I'm thinking not along the lines of like the data, but like, thank you so much. Your input allowed us to present to like blah, 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 and this.
I think that's a
I
great.
mean, that's what I'm thinking in my head, like, we could just email NCA and say, thank you to those who did participate in person and in the online survey. If you look at the agenda for the public safety, that's where some of that feedback.
I think that's great.
That's
I
great.
went into, I mean, MBA, we could also send them something, it's a very small meeting, but we could send it to them.
I think that's great.
Pride in the Park, their leadership.
Thank you. You know what?
Changed over,
It
but we
doesn't-
still send it.
Yeah, you can still send it.
Okay, so an email pointing to them too, where
Where it
those
is.
sessions got reported out.
Yes.
Okay.
Do
And
you,
thanking them.
do you want to just send something? If you see, if you send it to Pride since you met with them, and the Civic since you liaised with them, and CC me, I can make sure it also gets pushed out to NBA.
Right.
To NBA.
Okay. We can put together an email.
Mhm.
That'd be
We
great.
can keep it short and sweet, but just figuring out a
Great
way,
idea.
figuring out a way to link to the agenda in a way that's user friendly or.
You can even, I don't have it up in front of me, but you can. Or you pull it up, there's a link, and then you can just tell them what page that reports or something,
Okay.
assuming it's there.
Okay. That's
I think that's probably the most user friendly way.
that's a nice idea, so. We'll do that.
Great. Thank you, guys. So of the list of things that came out, the ones that included, I can read through the list that I accumulated. There are others, I'm sure, but generative AI, is there some greater benefit that we should be exploring to use for the police department? Anonymous suggestion box. The disconnect between the use of 911 and the public perception of 911, community events, other meets and greets, humanizing the police, is the note that I put, like, a budget for tab collar shirts, other efforts that we want to make when they're patrolling community events to make them available but more approachable. Review of policies with Chief String, and then an annual report. Ken had sent me a really great annual report that one police department put out that might be beneficial. And then something that came out of the last data that I just flagged that we hadn't discussed in here is keeping an eye on, how do I word it? Do we want to do a racial audit of traffic stops? Which I think is something that may be out of our effort level, but might be something that we want to look into. So those are the topics that came up. I think the racial audit is something that would need another year of trends on, or another couple of months of trends on. I think one report does not give us enough on that, but there was enough in the data that flagged it to me that we want to make sure we keep an eye on.
And also, just a note on that, Narberth is a major cut through traffic area, so we have demographic data for Narberth. I don't know that it exists demographic data for drivers in Narberth, so.
No, that is true. I mean, heading across in Montgomery Avenue and on Wynwood, they're both major cut-throughs. So it's not necessarily reflective of our citizens. However, it's still noticeable that there's a difference. So it's, there may be benign explanation and there may not be. So, I think it's something to keep an eye on. The things to me that rose to the surface and that seemed to generate the most interest when I raised them with borough council or with the mayor was the issue of 911 and the anonymous suggestion process. The anonymous suggestion box. Can
I go back to something? I'm sorry, I was just thinking.
Please.
So this cut through issue with traffic. I'm sure Lower Merion has the same issue, Lower Merion Township Police. So I'm sure Officer String, or what his title is, Chief String, will be able to, instead of reinventing the wheel, find out how Lower Merion Township Police has addressed that, if they've addressed it at all.
Which thing you're trying to address,
So
what is the racial demographics, or what is or stopping cut through?
Well, I'm combining the two. That it sounded to me like there's a concern that the racial demographics might be a certain way because there's a cut through, that the drivers are not represented.
No. So I'm sorry. If I could the data was noticeable, the large number of specifically of Black drivers that were stopped for traffic stops.
Right, and then the follow-up was.
The follow-up is that nefarious,
right, of course,
consciously or unconsciously, or is there a reason? Because really, on the roads that people are stopped, 75% of drivers are, it doesn't reflect the number of drivers that are actually on those roads at the times of the traffic stops.
Right, and I'm sure Lower Merion Township would have had to address this issue too if they've noticed this disparity.
That assumption I wouldn't make.
Okay, but we could check on that.
We could check on it, yeah.
Chief could check on that, I'm sure. Okay.
So can I give an update on the suggestion box?
Sure, thanks.
So when company I worked at had put one in place, and they had used something called Suggestion Box, which I guess is a popular platform for doing these. But as I was researching it, I realized it was more geared for workplace. There's a subscription, maybe there's a free version. And I was like, I don't know who's going to want to implement this because mostly it's something that HR does in your company. But I was looking around, I found another town that had an anonymous suggestion box, and I actually called the person, right? And I talked to the IT person, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we just did it through our website platform." So now they use a different website platform, but ours is MyGov. And so I actually contacted MyGov
Mhm.
and I was like, what are the capabilities for doing an anonymous suggestion box through MyGov? And the response I got from the support manager at MyGov was that MyGov has a built-in request manager module, which can allow anonymous requests to be submitted. Your module administrator would need to set this up and make the request types available to the public on the MyGov public portal. So there is like a form builder available through the platform.
That can be anonymous.
And it can be made, and the person I talked to in the other town, I was like, is it really, really anonymous? Because I know like if you do a Google form, like there's all.
Yeah, it drives.
Through, she's like, no, it's really, really anonymous, at least in their version. So I would assume if the MyGov person is saying it's anonymous, that it is. So we would just need to figure out who is administering
Great.
the narber.gov website, and it could be set up through that. Now, in the course of kind of looking at the current website, I was like, oh, because if we put this together, would probably want to have it on like the page that the police department has, because if somebody is trying to register some, anonymous feedback about the police, they would be looking for the police page. So well, I'm sure it could be linked in two places. We could have it on, there's a general page that has a place where you can report like, a downed branch, different things.
Right.
There's all kinds of, I didn't realize there's like 20 different kinds of requests.
Yes.
Or like complaints you can put in on the borough website. I was like, oh, this is handy. There's a down branch on my block. I'm gonna put it in. Work order for public works. Anyway, so I'm sure it could be placed there, but I think it would also, because people will look for the police department page if they have
Correct, there needs to be a
if
link.
they have a thought or complaint. And I noticed that we don't really have a police department page. Like, if you are on the Narberth Borough website and you click on police, it takes you to a page, and the page does say who the staff are, which is useful, and their email addresses.
Yes.
There's no information about how to contact the police, which I was like, oh, maybe this is part of the problem. Because if somebody's Googling Narberth Police Department, there's no indication of how to contact them in an emergency.
Yes.
So that's, I don't know if they're thinking of like redoing some stuff with the website already. Like, I don't wanna if that's already part of their agenda, that's great. But if it's not, we should probably say like, this could be redesigned. There could be more information here.
I agree,
And-
including the fact that there's the sign up for Smart 911, but they pushed out this agenda to get people on the, they were getting the name of the other, the Monco, Ready Monco or whatever and that's not,
Yeah.
the emergency alert system, and that's not on there either.
So I realized there are ways the website could definitely be improved for like clarity, visibility,
Okay.
communication, including like maybe having a button on the main page somewhere, like if you are looking for the police department, click here, like, because it's a little bit hidden in a drop down.
Right. Now, I appreciate why they don't want, which leads us to the other like big thing that I put on here, which is the 911 call.
Right.
Like, I appreciate that if they want everything channeled through 911, they don't want there's that tension between not wanting people to put something that's an emergency through a comment page.
Oh, no,
Right.
I'm not saying people should be using a form to submit.
Right, but it's too
What's
easy
the
to find the
call?
police department, like how to communicate with the police. Like it needs to be clear on there what the communication structure
Right.
is.
So they should say call 911, and the reason why you're calling is that all the calls are funneled through, like, give me whatever we need to communicate. That's a perfect place to put it, because I think in this day and age, a lot of people.
I agree.
I need to call them.
I think it's a solvable thing, but I think that's something.
I could just add to my experience with my equine vet, and you often have emergencies and levels of emergency. So when you get your veterinarian's voicemail, mine, it says, if you have a true emergency and you're getting this voicemail, if it's this kind of emergency, like call New Bolton, that's the equine surgery center. If it's this kind of emergency, hang up and call Stacy, my cover person. And if she doesn't call back within 5 minutes, call me again. So there's this like,
There is
this step, and it's very clear.
So this is bringing me up to the other question, which is the 911 issue. Now, as a committee, we had sort of posited like some sort of a public service campaign of 911 is for everyone is sort of the Cheryl slogan that we came up with. As I've been diving into this, now some of the data that I've collected so far is somewhat dated, but this is not a problem that hasn't been discussed, and 311 is the solution that a lot of that at least at the early part of the aughts was being pushed out. So that rather than establishing an entirely separate but parallel call system, where if it's an emergency, you call 911. If it's a public service issue, you call 311. And so that now, and I sent you a couple of reports just to look at. They're from 2005. So I recognize, even though it's weird in my head that that's 20 years ago, like I recognize that that's somewhat dated information. But I thought the reports were helpful anyways, because it spelled out some of the reasoning, right? In a large police department, it sort of streamlines some of the calls so that you're not getting as many emergency calls. But it also, in my head, really reflects the fact that we have a police department that we want to be both doing armed responses, but that we also are establishing specifically as a public service, as a public safety unit as well, that has like a broader mission. So I mentioned this sort of in passing, the 311 system, and I have not had an in-depth conversation with the police chief to see if this is explored. I don't exactly know what the cost is behind a separate dispatch, but it kind of spoke to me as something that we should be looking, I think that we should be looking into as a possible resolution.
The only thing I'll say about that is that's very much, I think, regional and not Norworth. Because Norworth isn't setting up its own 311, Montgomery County might, or Philadelphia might, so we just have to.
Philadelphia does have 311.
Okay.
I don't know how much is pushed out, how much it's used, but it does exist in Philadelphia. Montgomery County, I do not know. So I guess I put it on there to see, is this something that speaks to anyone other than me? Sometimes you go down these rabbit holes that seem interesting to you.
No, it speaks to me because in the past, I can remember specifically once, like calling and saying, this isn't really an emergency, but I need help.
I just, again, having little kids who are very rules followers, they're like, I'm not calling 911 unless it's an emergency. Like they're flat out refusing it, right? So now they're not the ones that are going to be calling it, but little people today are still being taught so distinctly. I'm just wondering, is it easier to go with that, or is it easier to go with the fact that the police want everyone to call 911 and changing public habits? I'm not sure.
I guess I'm not sure how a 311 number setup works. It sounds like maybe you need a bigger department to make it work if it's like a separate dispatch.
You may need your own internal dispatch, and we don't have that, obviously. Like I need to look more into what our dispatch system is.
Has anyone, so we do have a little landline for the police department, like a 610 number. When you call that, first of all, does somebody pick up during daytime hours, or are you put into like a phone tree where like, it's like, okay, if this is an emergency, call 911. If this is to report a blah, 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 press 2. If this.
You do.
You get a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you at least get it if it's to call 911. It only gets answered at the moment if someone's in the.
Okay, so there's no definite like hours for somebody's.
So
Like
this
between
is
8
something,
and 4.
I need to clarify this. So there is budget for a part-time administrative person in the Narberth office that has the police department that has not been hired.
Right.
When Missy left and that person, the replacement, who I am sorry to say, it's not Alan, it's whoever the other person is. The intention was that some subset of what they're gonna do is also going to be working with the police department. But I don't know what percentage, I don't know if the intention is that that's replacing it. I don't know exactly what they're doing, whether it's, filing or answering phones, I honestly do not know.
Yeah, no, and that might not be the best use of somebody's time just to sit and answer a phone that might ring, but like, I'm just very curious as to how they're steering people, and are they steering people? I mean, there is a pretty robust set of like forms on the website.
Except that you're a really involved citizen and you only just discovered them.
Right, so if the phone number points people to that, that would be useful.
Except that,
Like, if you're
most-
trying to report a down drainage, go to my.
yeah, but that's not, so like, there are these other kinds of emergencies that are sort of in the moment. And you're not gonna either, in mine.
Right.
I was walking in the street and I felt like it was a dangerous situation, but I wasn't bleeding yet. Like it wasn't a car accident. It's like I wouldn't like get out my phone and look for that number to call that is a landline that's only between like there's not enough time for that. So from that respect, I don't think it would be so useful that, oh, we have this landline number like buried somewhere and people can find it they can take some time to find it, because we're still talking about emergencies.
Well, so, the rationale from Chief String is we don't want you to make the determination whether that's an emergency or not. We want everything to come through 911.
Maybe we change the language, so instead of saying like, if it's an emergency, like something other than emergency, because the emergency in people's mind is like, brings up like cop shows, 911, sirens blaring.
Well,
So maybe we need to call it something else, like if this is time critical, or if this is something happening right now that you want.
but they don't want that either. They want
Right, they want
calls to go through
They
911.
want all calls to go through 911, both for
911 is the dispatch, but,
Oh, right,
and
yeah,
we do have the challenge of all public media or like television says, oh, you're not allowed to make a call, like you can't waste 911, that's illegal, like.
It's not even public media. I mean, this is what they're being taught by their teachers in the elementary school today. I mean, that's.
So I think we're going down a rabbit hole right now. I think bringing this up to Chief String of, have we explored a parallel system like 311? I think is an important question for them to go into. It is definitely much more of a local, and in theory, because your question about a different dispatch, in theory, it could be the same dispatch
It could be.
location.
Right.
There's a 311 call, there's a 911 call, you could pick, like, phone systems have that ability to differentiate, and so it
okay,
can go to the same person.
okay.
If that works, I don't know why they've not done
Well,
311.
they haven't done it, right. Okay.
So I think
And
that's it there.
respect that since 2005, the system has changed dramatically because of cell phones, right? So there's already we assume that it's Curious George, that when you call, there's a map and it tells them where you are, but that's not actually what happens with cell phones calling dispatch. So,
I didn't know that. I'm a Curious George assumer, so I don't want to get into how does it work, but maybe one of the issues that Chief String has probably already thought about is, so teach the teachers, is the message is coming from the teachers. And I'm using the teachers in this generic sense, right?
But the
well,
other,
this is the tension. The question is, do we change the system or do we change the public education?
the other question would be, what is the message that Lower Merion is? Because your kids in school are in Lower Merion. So if Narberth is giving the message, everyone call 911. I have no idea what the message that Lower Merion is giving, but our kids will be getting different messages potentially. And that's another thing that we should talk about, just like, if we want, whatever the messaging is, we should be consistent with Lower Merion and we should be going to the school district with it.
So, as I see it, these are two things that follow from the report that I sort of am setting as our first two projects. Katie has already taken and run with the MyGov and the anonymous, and I think that we can immediately put something together and make a recommendation to them about implementing it.
And maybe we can come up with some wording of like what would be.
Just one piece on that, because we didn't quite finish. I would recommend that we talk to an IT person, because is this really anonymous? Because they might say there's no names, but if they're IP addresses, and if someone gets subpoenaed, does that IP address go to Comcast, who then tells you, oh, this is Katie? So just,
Well,
It's-
I could write back to that, support account manager person at MyGov and just press them on that, is this true?
or
At the
What-
how it's anonymous,
Yeah.
right, so that then you can run that, because
like, is IP data included in the materials? Because
Okay,
most forms that I get that say no web address, but there is IP address in there. So like, there might be ways that someone that actually has the back end can determine.
it strikes me that there would need to be something affirmatively done for it to be anonymous, because otherwise there would be that trail.
And
so that.
there might be a system somewhere, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you for following up on that. I'll follow up with Chief String just to, you know, to see if 311 or some alternative system has been considered, report back at the next meeting, we'll let you guys know in the way. The other thing about priority setting. So one of the documents that we reviewed that was not relevant for our report, in 2017, there was a outside firm that was hired to do a report on the priorities of the police department, the matrix report. It's my opinion that too much has changed since 2017 and that should be an advisory document, but not necessarily a these are our priorities document. Not everyone agrees with me on that. So there is reference to the matrix report. You know, the changes since 2017 are the police department is now a functional department. We have a different mayor who's prioritized, you know, making sure we no longer have police officers sleeping in police cars and we have a new police chief. We have, I think, 2 police chiefs in now. In addition to the fact that the world has just changed dramatically in terms of policing since 2017. I do think, however, we all should familiarize ourselves with the report and look through the priorities in there just to be prepared in case, you know, we think that there's anything in there that should be considered before Borough Council starts asking us to consider any of those. And then the other question is, does anyone have any other priority that they want right now to make sure that we're working towards? Otherwise, I'm going to leave it at just 2 things. I think that's enough for us to kind of tackle immediately.
Only the suggestion that we made earlier about improve their web presence and
Yeah.
we can give them potential ideas. So like no policies are on our page, no annual updates are on our page. It literally just has phone numbers for the police officers that they don't answer, because it's not going through 911, so.
Do you see that as combined with whatever we're recommending?
I think that's a part of the communication piece, like when we talk about communication just in general, I think that becomes one part of it. Now, while they don't have a website, they do have a social media page and presence.
And they have been using that fairly effectively.
What's their social media?
Please.
They have a Facebook,
Oh, it's Facebook. Okay.
so occasionally, like, it's not super frequent, but like, they'll post something, like, they had a post recently about, like, that people were finding that their unlocked cars were getting broken into, or, I guess it's not really rifled, unlocked, but rifled through. So they just, you know, posted a reminder, like, you have to lock your cars.
As with anything on Facebook these days, though, it's like it needs to be amplified, otherwise it gets lost. in the algorithm.
Andrea usually reposts it.
Yep.
I don't know if Ed Ridgway reposts it on it does. But yeah, not everyone follows the specifically from police Facebook page, so.
When Nana's Kitchen was vandalized, I know they posted
They.
updates and just let people know.
What was that?
When Nana's
Who?
Kitchen.
Oh, right, I didn't know, and that, so we all use something different. I actually read the Lower Merion, the emails from, I'm not on Facebook, I'm hardly on Facebook, but I read it through my emails.
It was in the newsletter.
Newsletter
format
that came
too,
out.
the email,
Yeah.
there was an email,
Yeah,
so.
I was just wondering if there's an Instagram, which I am not on, but young people tend to use it, right? Is that right, Ken?
Yes, young people use Instagram much more than Facebook probably, I think. I don't know that I know all the demographics, but I don't know if we have a please.
I'm not suggesting it, I'm just asking, because you have,
Nothing easily found.
okay. I'm not suggesting we have one, I was just questioning.
Yeah. So I am going to, we're sort of at a transition point as a committee from initial mandate to what comes next. We're gonna feel our way through it for the next couple of meetings. I am not going to have meetings that are unnecessary. So I think we should go forward on these two. I personally, in the back of my head, also, I really like the annual report, Ken, that you found, and think that we should, at the very least, discuss it with, I don't know if it's something that comes from us, comes from the police chief, comes from the mayor, but I think it's worth beginning to sort of take a look at that. All right, does anyone have anything else? I didn't put new business, old business on the. There's a comment from we already did public comment, but given that I opened it up to all of us, I'm happy to hear.
Just additional topic. I know you looked at a lot of metadata or whatever. Have you looked into use of force? How many instances of use of force have been, and whether or not the chief has conducted use of force reviews? There's a process that anytime an officer uses force, there's supposed to be a review and documentation of the use of force. Now, I don't know how that works between Narberth and Lower Merion, when the event happens in Narberth, should it be a use of force conducted by the chief? The past is past. I mean, the chief has resigned, but it'd be interesting to know how many times there are uses of force in Narberth.
Right. I have not seen any data of use of force. It's not in the regular UCR data that they sent over us.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it exists in theory, but I've not seen anything.
And how many reprimands for not using their body cameras appropriately? Obviously, Narberth didn't have them until recently. But what is the ramifications of an officer when someone leaves it in their car or doesn't turn it on promptly? Did this happen with Lower Merion? And I know you don't get that data.
At the moment that type of data
rewarded, and what are, instead of, rewarding officers, and
Those are all excellent comments, and I'm adding it to our list to discuss with the chief of what's happening with that. The body cams, the last I heard, were still in testing.
writing effective
but
policy.
There should be an effective policy, not just about using them, but about reviewing
There's all
their
going
use.
forward stuff. Now, there's actual events that have, brought these, to light.
Great, thank you.
And writing reports, when they file a criminal complaint,
So I'm gonna pause you about the specifics.
well, when they looks like, different officers had verbatim statements, it seems suspect that, they all should have their independent write-ups of how an event unfolded. But, when language between officers looks very similar, it's perplexing how that can be,
You raised that excellent point
I
that
know
you raised.
maybe beyond what you're.
I think that
But these are real world issues,
Okay, John, I'm gonna stop you there.
And additional,
Tom? We
how.
heard you, Tom. We heard you, but
Excessive prosecution,
we
how
heard
to
you,
come up
but
with charges,
Okay.
multiple,
And John, I'm gonna ask you to stop now. I do appreciate hearing from you. I think it's a good point. We will add it to look at. Some of these things are greater systemic than we have authority to do, but I do think it's an important thing for us to add to our list, and I appreciate you, Lisa.
Yeah, you know.
I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you now. Okay, I'm gonna, does anyone want to move to adjourn the meeting?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.